World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, did not erupt in a single moment. It was not a sudden explosion, but a slow-burning fire that grew hotter year after year. To understand how the world fell back into chaos just 2 decades after World War I, we must look closely at the political tensions, broken treaties, rising dictators, economic collapse, and dangerous ambitions that shaped the 1930s. This period is known as the Road to War. After World War I ended in 1918, Europe was in ruins, millions were dead, economies were destroyed, and governments were struggling to rebuild. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, was meant to ensure long-lasting peace. Instead, it left Germany humiliated, angry, and economically shattered. Germany was forced to accept blame for the entire war, pay massive reparations, and dismantle most of its military. These terms created deep resentment among the German people. They felt punished, powerless, and betrayed. By the early 1920s, Germany's economy had collapsed. Hyperinflation wiped out people's life savings. Ordinary families carried baskets of worthless banknotes just to buy bread. Unemployment skyrocketed. People were desperate for a leader who could restore pride and stability. And in this moment of national despair, Adolf Hitler emerged. Hitler was a powerful speaker who promised simple solutions to complex problems. He blamed Germany's suffering on the Treaty of Versailles, on politicians, and on specific groups of people. Many Germans, tired of chaos, believed him. In 1933, Hitler legally rose to power as Chancellor of Germany. Within months, he eliminated political opponents, destroyed democracy, and established a total dictatorship. Hitler's goals were clear: rebuild the German military, expand German territory, unite all German-speaking people, establish a dominant German empire in Europe. The world watched nervously, but few believed he would go as far as he later did. Step 1. Destroying the Treaty of Versailles. One of Hitler's first actions was to rebuild the German military, something the Treaty of Versailles strictly prohibited. Factories secretly produced weapons. Young men were trained as soldiers under the guise of sports clubs. Then in 1935, Hitler openly announced the creation of a new German army, navy, and air force. Britain and France protested, but did nothing else. They were still recovering from their own economic problems and were terrified of another war. This silence encouraged Hitler. He realized he could break rules without facing consequences. Step 2. The remilitarization of the Rhineland. 1936. Hitler's next move shocked Europe. In 1936, he sent German troops into the Rhineland, a region between Germany and France that was supposed to remain free of soldiers as a buffer zone. If France had responded with military force, the German army, still weak at the time, would have retreated. But once again, Britain and France did nothing. They hoped avoiding confrontation would prevent another war. Instead, their silence convinced Hitler that Europe would not stand up to him. Germany's prestige soared. Hitler became a national hero in the eyes of many Germans. His gamble had paid off. Step 3. Alliance with Italy and Japan. During the mid-1930s, Hitler found 2 new allies, countries with similar ambitions. Italy, under dictator Benito Mussolini, wanted to restore the glory of the Roman Empire. Japan, ruled by militarists, wanted control of Asia and the Pacific. These 3 nations, Germany, Italy, and Japan, formed the Axis powers. Their partnership would later plunge the world into global war. Step 4. The expansion begins. Austria. 1938. Hitler next turned toward Austria, his birthplace. He believed Austria and Germany belonged together. In 1938, German troops marched into Austria without a single shot being fired. Many Austrians welcomed them, and the country was annexed into Germany in what Hitler called the Anschluss. The international community protested but again failed to act. With every victory, Hitler grew more confident. Step 5. The Sudetenland crisis. Czechoslovakia. 1938. Hitler's next target was the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia where many ethnic Germans lived. He claimed they were being mistreated, though there was no real evidence. His true goal was to conquer Czechoslovakia's land and use its strong industries for war production. Britain and France, desperate to avoid conflict, met Hitler in Munich in 1938, and what became known as the Munich Agreement. They gave him permission to take the Sudetenland in exchange for his promise not to take more territory. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously declared, "We have secured peace for our time." But peace was an illusion. Within months, Hitler broke his promise. In March 1939, he invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia. This was no longer about uniting German-speaking people, it was naked aggression. Europe finally realized appeasement had failed, but by now, Germany was far stronger. Step 6. The Nazi-Soviet Pact. August 1939. Europe expected that if Hitler attacked Poland next, the Soviet Union would fight him. But in a shocking twist, Germany and the Soviet Union announced a non-aggression pact. The Nazi-Soviet Pact stunned the world. Two ideologies that hated each other, Nazism and communism, suddenly agreed not to fight. But the agreement had a secret clause. Germany and the Soviet Union planned to divide Poland between them. The stage was set. Europe was heading straight toward war. Step 7. The final trigger. Invasion of Poland. September 1, 1939. At dawn on September 1, 1939, without declaring war, Germany launched a massive attack on Poland. The invasion was fast, brutal, and ruthlessly coordinated. German planes bombed cities and rail lines, tanks thundered across the borders. Soldiers moved rapidly, striking deep into Polish territory. Hitler called this strategy Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, a method of quick, overwhelming strikes to crush the enemy before they could respond. Poland fought back bravely, but stood no chance against the modern German war machine. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east, fulfilling their secret agreement. 2 days later, on September 3rd, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The world had reached a point of no return. The deadliest conflict in history had begun. Section 1 Summary. Narrator tone. The 1930s were a time of political tension, failed diplomacy, and dangerous underestimation. The world hoped Hitler could be reasoned with. The world hoped another war could be avoided, but the world was wrong. Europe's silence, fear, and hesitation allowed a dictator to grow to powerful. By September 1939, all the sparks of the past 6 years erupted into a fire that would engulf the planet. This was the road to World War II. By the beginning of 1942, the Axis powers seemed nearly unstoppable. Germany dominated Europe from the Atlantic to the borders of Russia. Italy controlled parts of North Africa. Japan was expanding across Asia and the Pacific with terrifying speed. For a moment, it appeared that the world might fall under totalitarian rule, but history was about to shift. Between 1942 and 1943, the Allies launched a series of heroic, desperate, and decisive battles that transformed the course of the war. This was the moment when the unstoppable Axis advance was finally halted and slowly reversed. The Eastern Front, Operation Barbarossa falters 1941 to 1940 to Hitler believed that invading the Soviet Union would be quick and easy. In June 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. 3 massive German army groups stormed into Soviet territory, capturing huge areas of land and millions of prisoners. But by late 1941, the German advance slowed. The Soviet Union did not collapse. The Red Army fought fiercely, and the brutal Russian winter, one of the coldest in decades, shattered German confidence. German soldiers froze in their trenches, lacking proper winter clothing. Still, the Eastern Front remained the deadliest, largest battlefield the world had ever seen. In 1942, Hitler made a fateful decision. Instead of focusing on capturing Moscow, he turned south toward the rich oil fields of the Caucasus. And along the way stood a city whose name carried enormous symbolic weight: Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad, August 1942, February 1943. If there is one battle that symbolized the turning point of World War II, it is Stalingrad. Hitler believed that capturing the city would break Soviet morale. Stalin, equally stubborn, ordered his armies not one step back. What followed was one of the bloodiest battles in history. A city turned to hell. Stalingrad became a nightmare. The Luftwaffe bombed the city into ruins, creating a landscape of smoking rubble. But instead of retreating, Soviet soldiers used the destruction to their advantage. Fighting erupted street by street, building by building, room by room. Snipers hid in burned-out factories. Soldiers battled for control of staircases, rooftops, and sewers. The Germans called it the Rat War. By November 1942, the German Sixth Army controlled most of the city, but they were exhausted, freezing, and running out of supplies. Then came the Soviet counterattack, Operation Uranus. In a perfectly coordinated strike, Soviet forces encircled the Germans, surrounding them completely. Hitler refused to allow his army to retreat. He promised they would be supplied from the air, but the supplies never came. Winter arrived again, brutal and unforgiving. The trapped German soldiers suffered from hunger, frostbite, and disease. In February 1943, the German Sixth Army finally surrendered. It was a catastrophic defeat. Nearly 300,000 German soldiers were killed or captured. Stalingrad marked the beginning of Germany's decline. From this moment on, the Red Army would push west slowly but relentlessly toward Berlin. North Africa, the Desert War 1940–1943, while titanic battles raged in Russia, another critical campaign unfolded across the deserts of North Africa. Here, German and Italian forces under the command of General Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, fought against British and Commonwealth troops. Rommel was a brilliant tactician, and his early victories threatened key Allied positions. His ultimate goal was to seize the Suez Canal, which connected the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. If he succeeded, the Allies would lose a vital lifeline. The turning point, the Battle of El Alamein, October-November 1942. In late 1942, British forces under General Bernard Montgomery launched a massive assault at El Alamein in Egypt. The battle was fierce. Tanks clashed across the desert. Artillery roared through the night. But this time, Rommel could not break through. Montgomery's victory at El Alamein was decisive. Churchill famously said, "Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat." The momentum was shifting. Operation Torch. The Allies land in North Africa November 1942. At the same time, The United States now fully engaged in the war launched its first major offensive. American and British forces landed on the coasts of Morocco and Algeria in the operation called Torch. Caught between Allied forces in the west and Montgomery's army in the east, the Axis powers in North Africa were trapped. By May 1943, over 250,000 German and Italian troops surrendered. North Africa was now in Allied hands. The victory opened a pathway to the next stage, invading southern Europe. The Pacific Theater, Japan's early success 1-9 for 1, 1-9 for 2, while Europe burned. The war in the Pacific exploded with astonishing ferocity. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, destroying battleships, aircraft, and thousands of lives. The United States declared war the next day. Japan then swept through Southeast Asia and the Pacific, capturing the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, Guam, Burma, countless Pacific islands. It seemed unstoppable. But just months later, Japan would face its own turning point. The Battle of Midway, June 1940 to Midway, was one of the most important naval battles in history. Using intelligence breakthroughs, the United States learned of a massive Japanese attack planned near Midway Island. On June 4, 1942, American aircraft launched daring strikes against the Japanese fleet. In a shocking outcome, the U.S. Navy sank for Japanese aircraft carriers, the core of Japan's offensive power. The loss was devastating. Japan would never again regain strategic initiative. Midway marked the moment the Pacific War shifted in favor of the Allies. Island hopping, the U.S. strikes back 1943. After Midway, the United States began a new strategy, island hopping. Instead of attacking every Japanese-held island, the Allies targeted key locations one by one, capturing airfields and cutting off Japanese supply lines. The first major offensive was the brutal battle for Guadalcanal 1942-43. Jungle warfare, naval clashes, disease, and constant combat pushed both sides to the limit. But after months of fighting, the U.S. emerged victorious. Guadalcanal was Japan's first major land defeat and a signal that the tide in the Pacific was turning. The Allied momentum grows late 1942 to 1943. By the end of 1943, three major shifts had occurred. 1. Germany was on the defensive in the east. Stalingrad shattered the myth of German invincibility. The Red Army pushed west. 2. The Allies dominated North Africa. El Alamein and Operation Torch ended Axis presence in the region. 3. Japan suffered critical losses in the Pacific. Midway and Guadalcanal halted Japan's expansion. The Allies, once pushed to the brink, were now pushing back. A global counterattack had begun. Section 3 Summary Narrator Tone. The years 1940 and 1943 were the turning point of World War II. For the first time, the Axis war machine began to falter. In the ruins of Stalingrad, in the scorching sands of North Africa, and across the vast waters of the Pacific, Allied forces achieved victories that changed the direction of history. The world had stepped back from the edge of total defeat. But the war was far from over. The next battles would be even more brutal. The end of World War II did not bring immediate peace. It brought a world standing in ruins, staring at the cost of humanity's darkest years. Entire cities were smashed into dust. Tens of millions were dead. Countries were starving. Families were broken. And every survivor carried scars the world could not see. Across Europe, people walked through collapsed neighborhoods searching for missing relatives, while governments struggled to rebuild roads, factories, and energy systems. Germany itself was divided into four zones controlled by the Allies: America, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Berlin, once a proud capital, was now a shattered battlefield split between East and West. The seeds of a new global tension were already growing. One of the most painful discoveries after the war was the full truth of the Holocaust. Liberation forces opened concentration camps like Auschwitz and saw the unimaginable mass graves, starving prisoners, and the remains of families destroyed. The world vowed, never again. This tragedy led to a new awareness of human rights and the urgent need for global cooperation. To prevent another world war, the victorious nations created the United Nations in 1945. Unlike the League of Nations, the UN had stronger structure and global support. It became a platform for diplomacy, peacekeeping, humanitarian aid, and resolving international disputes. For the first time, the world tried to build peace together rather than separately. However, not everything moved toward peace. A new rivalry began emerging between the United States and the Soviet Union. Their political systems, democracy versus communism, clashed dramatically. What started as cooperation during the war slowly turned into suspicion and competition. By 1947, this tension had a name: the Cold War. Countries around the world were pressured to choose sides, and nuclear weapons became symbols of power. At the same time, former colonies in Asia and Africa began fighting for independence. After seeing the destruction of European empires and the idea of freedom spread during the war, nations like India, Indonesia, Vietnam, and many others demanded self-rule. World War II became a turning point that reshaped the balance of global power forever. Japan, under American occupation, transformed completely. Its military was dissolved, its economy restructured, and its society rebuilt with democratic principles. In Europe, the Marshall Plan 1948 injected billions of dollars to help rebuild cities, restart industries, and support education. This plan helped Western Europe recover much faster than expected and prevented the spread of communism. By 1949, the world was changed beyond recognition. Germany officially split into West Germany and East Germany. NATO was established as a new military alliance. The Soviet Union developed its own nuclear bomb, ending America's monopoly on atomic power. The stage for a new kind of global struggle, political, ideological, and technological, was now fully set. The World War II ended. Its consequences shaped the next 75 years of global history. It redrew borders, rebuilt nations, and forced humanity to rethink war, peace, justice, and the value of life. The world learned that conflict on such a massive scale must never be allowed to happen again. And so, from the ashes of the greatest war in human history, a new world order was born, one filled with hope, fear, opportunity, and responsibility.